Hey guys, it's Vince. Today in this video, we're taking yet another look at a content creator who's installing a spindle cable on his spindle. And of course, he wanted to put this on camera. What makes this video, I feel, more unique than many of my others is that this particular content creator has well over 300,000 subs. Now, thinking about that, I hope many of you really understand the gravity when you get that high up with that many people you're influencing and what the potential for disaster is in terms of stability and safety comes into effect. Let's jump right in.
Today's video is sponsored by Stepper Online. I always use Stepper Online for my stepper motors, spindle motors, power supplies, drivers, any hardcore electronics.
Well, in the first 10 seconds of the video, he covers that his video is sponsored. Makes sense. YouTube asks that as you put your video up. He explains that Stepper Online is the sponsor and that he purchases all of his hardcore electronics from them. And of course, I believe he means hardcore motion control electronics. The question I have to ask my audience right in the beginning is, if a content creator is paid by a sponsor, which is what happens on YouTube, to do basically a commercial for them, if the content in the video that they're sponsored and paid for contains incorrect information, does the sponsor still have to pay them? It's a viable question. If you pay for a service and the guy says, hey, I'm going to install a septic tank, and that septic tank gets installed, but it's installed incorrectly, do you still owe him money? I want you to think about what I'm asking you, because this happens all too frequently. And I want you to think about what happens when we deal with a person doing this, not only with the sponsor, but also with YouTube. Once again, as YouTube's algorithm gets stronger, it will begin vetting information. But until that time, how much money is paid out on videos that are simply put out in an entertainment format, even though the DIY information included in the video is incorrect? It's a very good question. You got to wonder how much money is being spent paying people for incorrect information. It's kind of like giving somebody an A on the test who didn't study. Let's see where this goes.
And showing you how it's done, but don't forget, you're dealing with high-powered electrics here. If you are not electrically minded and you want to have a go yourself, you must have it checked out by a qualified electrician before ever you turn it on.
Well, I agree with Mr. Webb 100% that you should certainly get qualified help if you're a novice working with a three-phase spindle power cable, or for that matter, the three-phase VFD that's powering it. Again, this is not DC electronics in the sense that we're only dealing with very low voltages. This can easily kill you. That being said, it's interesting that he points out to get an electrician to help you. Guys, there needs to be a differentiation between what electricians do and what they don't do. Electricians will not be soldering your spindle cable. Electricians will not be assembling your spindle cable. Some may have experience with soldering. But again, we've heard that a lot of people online have experience with soldering, and then when we see it and we see exactly what they produce, it's obvious they don't have the skill set to achieve the job properly and, more importantly, safely. Now, thinking about this, I want you to think in terms of this disclosure that he's made, and think, why is there another disclosure on his video that he never brings up? And the only way you really find it is if you scroll down and go to the video description section. Now, to me, that really doesn't make sense. If you're doing a video and we're doing a video with a disclosure on your channel, you should be obligated to disclose that disclosure at the beginning of the video. Don't just disclose a reworded disclosure that really doesn't show exactly what you mean as far as the detail covered in the disclosure in your video description. Because as you're going to see, there are two different specific disclosures. Let's look at it right now. I'll put it on the screen. These videos, commentary, and/or advice are intended for entertainment and inspiration for adults over 16 years old. Woodworking and metalworking are dangerous. Always seek professional advice and training before using any power tools, or CNC machines. If you have any uncertainty before performing any DIY procedure, stop and learn a safer method. Understand that there are years of learning and experimentation by me that are not in the videos. Do not attempt anything simply because you saw or heard it in one of my videos. You can have a safe, enjoyable, and even inspirational time in your workshop by understanding your own tools, materials, and your own skill level.
To the spindle. Now then, the cable you require is a 4-core 3-phase cable. Now you can purchase this.
All right, so let's break down what Mr. Webb is actually discussing, because some of the terms he's using may not resonate with all of the audience. When you hear the term core used referring to cable, what they're discussing is how many leads are within that cable. Now, for a spindle cable, you need a 4-lead cable. He called it core, I called it leads. It's easier, once again, for the audience to understand, I feel. Now, that being said, he also states that the cable is 3-phase. There are no real ratings for 3-phase cable other than the exterior voltage ratings and insulation ratings on the cable, and all manufacturers print that on the exterior casing. Once again, 99.9% of spindles used that we see in smaller grade CNC robots are going to be usually between 2.2 to 4 kilowatt. In that range, you're usually fine using a 16 gauge double shielded spindle cable, preferably in an ultra flex rating. Now, why do I go with ultra flex rating? Or for that matter, why did I design a DS flexion cable? Because DS flex is designed for ultra flex positions, in that it's a continuous flex rated cable, so that if you install it within a cable chain that most users will do to keep their cables neat, once that cable chain goes fore and aft with the y-axis, or left and right with the gantry of the x-axis, you're going to find that that cable will be continuously flexing back and forth and back and forth. And as it does that, the internal leads within the cable are also flexing. So if you do not use a continuous flex cable, what you will find is that those internal leads within the spindle cable will begin to fracture internally, if the cable is well made. And why I say if the cable is well made, God forbid they fracture and cause an external fracture, then the cable leads will actually fracture and break without the casing. And if that happens and they break through the casing, you could have a dead short, which could be catastrophic. So again, using the proper cable and understanding that this is more than just saying words. We have to understand the gravity of what we're talking about and what potential effect it can have on an audience if this is not covered very, very clearly, because these details will define how, number one, the robot is going to be as far as stability, but overall, and most important, how safe it's going to be.
So what we're going to do now is connect into the motor, and I'm going to show you in detail how to do that. Incidentally, you will need ready flux solder and a soldering iron. You don't rely on crimped electrical connectors for a 3-phase unit.
Mr. Webb just got done explaining what tools are required to install your connectors on your spindle cable that he's going to cover the assembly of. He stated you'll need some flux core solder. He also stated you'll need a soldering iron. What Mr. Webb did not state is the most essential component when soldering. And like many content creators before him, this is a defining factor of incompetence in this skill set. You absolutely must have, and it is absolutely mandatory, flux. Mr. Webb, flux actually allows for proper wetting action when you're going to perform soldering. It also takes the conductors you're going to join and cleans them. If you do not use flux, and I'll state this twice, if you do not use flux, you will have compromised connections. Why do I say that? Because without proper wetting action and without two clean conductors going to be joined together with this process, you will never have full bond strength. This compromises the connection and once again can lead to a catastrophic failure if done incorrectly, on top of the fact we are working, and I want to reiterate this point, with a 3-phase power cable, which you brought up yourself. We need, as content creators, especially ones with the amount of audience you have, to hold ourselves accountable. These topics need to be researched thoroughly to make sure that what information we put out does not jeopardize anyone's safety. This is critical, and we should hold ourselves to a much higher standard once we've achieved the level of audience this gentleman has.
So what I've done is I've peeled back the outer layer of insulation on this 3-phase 4-core cabling.
Okay, well, it's apparent Mr. Webb is unaware of the proper cable to be used with a spindle VFD combination. And the reason I can say that is because we can identify his cable right here, and as I zoom in on it, we can see that there is no tin-braided copper shield, no mylar foil shield, and no shield drain in this cable. Now, once again, if you use incorrect cables to wire your spindle and your VFD combination, you are not mitigating the EMI produced by these high amperage devices. And guess what happens? Your robot will become susceptible to that electromagnetic interference. Once again, those cables that are not shielded essentially become antennas, and they will radiate EMI. Now, this gentleman has got some amazing videos on his channel, no doubt. He's an amazing woodworker. He's shown it before. He's gotten millions of views. Why a content creator would cover this topic, one that he obviously doesn't understand, and not by me saying it, but by him showing it, and me just pointing out the obvious, is really baffling to me. I believe the only reason that this was done is because Stepper Online offered to sponsor him, and due to the fact that he felt that this sponsorship would benefit him in the sense that as he continues to work with CNC equipment, he would get free components. Unfortunately, just because you're a woodworker with the equipment doesn't mean you understand all facets of the electronics, which is defined right here. Now, whether or not you like me or not is irrelevant. What I'm stating is fact. And this gentleman, hopefully, will learn from this video. Learn in the sense that we should not, as content creators, put up any video where we are making a tutorial about a topic that we do not understand. Simply making a disclosure and stating that this is for entertainment purposes doesn't excuse the fact you use terminology in your video like, I'm going to show you how to do this. Well, when you state, sir, you're going to show us how to do it, that means that you, as an adult, as a content creator, should be willing to take responsibility for your actions. And that means providing accurate information. And guess what? If you don't know it, don't do it.
Right, so I've taken off the 3 connectors for the 3-phase, and this is the connector I've got for the earth. So what you simply do, I'll just show you one, because it's pretty repetitious. You don't take off too much of the insulation, just choose the right.
Many people in my audience are familiar with the phrase, let the tool do the work. I was raised with that phrase from my father, and it took me years to understand exactly what that means. But what we see Mr. Webb here doing is simply not that. And what we actually see is him not understanding how to use friction strippers properly. Let me explain. When you insert a lead into a friction wire stripper in the appropriate hole for the gauge lead you're trying to strip, the objective is not to use sheer manpower in terms of brute force to separate the casing from the lead by pulling it out. No, sir. What you're supposed to do is insert the lead within the stripper and rotate the stripper until the casing of the lead you're trying to strip is fractured, and then you carefully remove it. Now, why do I say that? Well, if you were using the appropriate cable and you went to do something like that, there are many times you may pull that lead through the cable with enough force that it could actually either separate it or potentially break the casing within the cable. I've seen that done as well. So I'm telling you right now, what I'm explaining is not me just sheerly picking him apart. No. What I'm doing is trying to show you how to save all of your investment, because if you buy double shielded cable to do this project correctly, it's not cheap, no. Here is a brief demonstration of the process being done correctly. And once again, the individual actually explains why he's doing this, which is excellent.
Many DIYers start by just putting the wire stripper around, closing it, and trying to pull it off. Now that way may work sometimes, but often it doesn't, like it doesn't here. Why? Because the cutters didn't cut all the insulation all the way around. So best practice is to close the cutters and then quarter turn each way, and then the insulation comes off easily.
Now, the soldering iron has been warming up for some time. So what you need to do is get a little bit of solder on your soldering iron.
All right, so Mr. Webb is going to attempt soldering so he can show his audience the proper way to do it. Now, that being said, let's discuss what we see in this snapshot of the video. First and foremost, we can see that his iron has an enormous amount of carbon on it. That is not best practice. All of your soldering components should be immaculately clean, because that is what's going to help you achieve the strongest joint. Now, of course, his soldering iron, if it has an enormous amount of carbon buildup, it's not going to produce the proper amount of heat that it should. So that should naturally have been clean prior to him shooting this portion of the video. That being said, we see that he's feeding his flux core solder onto the tip of his soldering iron, just keeps feeding it. Now, here's the thing to keep in mind, guys, and this is fact. If you don't use flux and you keep feeding solder onto the soldering iron that has flux in it, what you find is that if you do not have the ability to transfer that solder to the connector immediately without using flux, which is virtually impossible, you're going to find that that solder that's on the tip that you try to tin the iron with turns black. Why does it turn black? It turns black because it's getting overheated, and you said it, the flux is already burned off. That's how small of an amount of flux is actually in that flux core solder. It is not designed for you to just keep beating up the solder on the tip of your iron. So this right here, what we're seeing right here, anyone who understands soldering, and I do a lot of it, I can tell you right now, this is not correct. And this is just the beginning. Let's see where this goes.
I'll zoom you in a little bit. Might be able to see a little bit better what's going on. So, first of all, we need to get some solder inside this. So just heat it up.
Wow.
Okay, because
All right, so we saw Mr. Webb fighting his connection in that he was not getting the solder to properly flow as he was not using flux. So he did not have any capillary action whatsoever. Nothing was wet. It did not, once again, get sucked into the connector. He just sat there and basically kept applying heat. And as you apply heat, it's a byproduct. It's going to evaporate all of the internal flux within flux core solder. So rather than waste time, let's jump right in. I'll put my money where my mouth is, and I'm going to show you the proper way it's done using the proper flux, and you guys can once again see how it should have been done and see the difference of what results actually occur when you're following a proper process.
All right, guys, I want to simulate what Mr. Webb was doing, and I'm going to show you a way to do it when you're working with a connector that does not have a seam. Now, all of my ring connectors do have seams. This connector, I used a different method to solder, and I actually put the solder and flux in the front, and with that flux inside this hole right here, meaning the back, you can see that we've got solder that through capillary action actually ran to the back and filled the hole. This, once again, is understanding how solder and flux works. No different than soldering pipes for my plumbers out there. You guys already know exactly where I'm going with this. So I'm going to add flux, once again, to the hole that's in the ring connector. So that has nothing to do with the seam. I just added the flux within this hole. So now we've got this gap hole up front. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my iron carefully. I'm going to do the same thing that we did on the back end. Let's go. And we're going to go from the front. And through that capillary action, we should be golden. Just a little bit on the tip. Right there. Carry over. I'm using my thumb as a jig. Done. Not enough. Let me get more in there. Hold on. Let me just get my flux. Now, of course, this is much more difficult than him just using a ring connector with the proper seam in there. There you go. And you can see we've got solder in there. See if I can pivot this up. Can you see it?
Yep.
Okay. So we have solder in there now from this front end. Now what we can do is also add solder again by just putting more flux in right there. Don't worry about being clean with that because that'll wipe right up with that Q-tip. Once again, real expensive. Okay. Now what we're going to do is just a teeny bit, because we already have solder there. We should still get capillary action once I insert this. And there she goes. Now we just filled it. Let's just let that cool for a second. And you can see for yourselves that is all filled up, and she is quite hot. You can see right in there we've got enough solder. Now, this did not fill 100%, but that's okay. In his case, it really wouldn't matter as long as the lead now he's going to insert has enough tin on it, it will fill up those gaps. So watch this. We'll take this, same process. Oh, that's a little short. That's what she said. There we go. Okay. Once again, casing is cut. Got the copper conductors. I'm just going to come in here real gentle and spiral. That's it. Come in tin. 1, 2, 3. You'll see that drop of flux sitting there. That's no bueno. Here we go. Done? Now that's good. I'm going to add a little more solder on here so that we can fill those gaps when that goes through. Done. And now you can see there's a nice little bead of solder, a little bit thicker. We're not trying to go crazy. What we're trying to do is fill up that gap because he didn't have that clearance, once again, of the seam to actually create that capillary action that we want. So now we'll fill up the connector again with flux. We're going to hit it on our conductor. And now, once again, you guys practice this before going live because it will make a huge difference. We're going to come from the front. Just going to come in here. Right in. And that's you. There you go. You can see exactly what you got. Let's clean it. Once again, no degradation on the casing. Everything here came out flawless. The bead that we have will be covered by heat shrink, and not only that, you can see the end, how perfect that came out. Boom. So you can solder in any angle, any way you'd like. The main thing is that you're using flux. And you didn't see me fight anything. I wasn't fighting with heat. This was done at 650. You can see that right there. And there is your conductor. Once again, flawless. That's not going nowhere. And you can see the finish, because guys always ask me about that. They're like, I can't get my solder to get that pretty chrome look that you get. And again, it's the combination of the type of flux you're using. Look at that. It's the type of flux and the type of solder. There you go. Another point, real quick, I'm giving you guys a lot of tips here. Hopefully you're paying attention. See, a lot of guys go to tin, and when they go to tin, they do this. They'll take the iron, have the solder here, and go to tin, and then take the iron over here to go tin. That makes no sense. Let me tell you why. You're wasting all that flux that's available in the flux core solder along with your own flux. Watch what I mean. If I take this and I apply flux here, if I keep the proximity close to my solder, the flux that's within the solder is also going to give me some effect as well, because now we're adding more, and you can see what you get. Now that looks like a lot of solder, right? Watch. And if you get a bead, no big deal. You see how fast you can do this with flux. I'm just putting a drop on, and the flux will let it wet and properly let it level. Done? And you see how fast that is. Done? And that conductor is now set. Always lay your conductor on your silicone. The reason I say that, silicone can be cleaned easily. This is easy to clean. You start getting it on your mats and stuff. I have to work on rubber because everything is insulated, but you can see how that is perfectly tinned. And if you're not happy with the finish, just keep doing it carefully. It's the best way to practice. And there you go. And you can keep adding more or reducing it, but you can definitely see that has fully penetrated. Once again, take your flush cutters, insert your lead, put your index finger over the flush cutter, not directly in contact. You're just trying to stop that cigar end of the lead from coming off. And there you go. You can check and see just how perfect that penetrated. That's the difference. You didn't see me sitting there and just cooking the lead like we keep seeing them do, like this. This is what most of them do. I'll show you exactly what he was doing. Okay. He was doing this. Look, that's why you need flux. Look at this. Same exact product, same solder. Nothing, right? Watch. Instant. A little more. Instant. Done. Which way is better, guys? I'm showing you live. Which way is better? Does this look right? Because to me, that was seconds. And that's why I'm telling you, it's all about the details. There is no way you can pretend about this. You either do it or you don't. And if you're just touching it, it's like a guy who's never welded before, and I've said this before, if you have a welder who's experienced, he could tell you right off the bat, hey, this isn't right. So that's why I'm telling you, you've got to pay close attention to these details, especially when working with three-phase power cables. Because God forbid something fails, and if you just use the solder without the flux, and that occurs, you're going to have one hell of a bad day.
Some solder in there now. Let me get our wire. Alright, heat that up a little. Got some solder on here. It's called tinning.
No, that's called cooking. Cooking with Mr. Webb.
Make sure you got solder on it.
All right, so I get a lot of questions regarding soldering technique, working with ring connectors. And once again, I want to give you guys as much value for those that really want to learn as possible. Naturally, there's always going to be some trolls that are not happy with what I produce, and that's fine because they feel I'm coming down on someone. Once again, my utter goal here is to make sure that you have the knowledge you need through the fact that I practice my craft daily to get the results you're looking for. Now, if you're okay with subpar work, you're going to find that subpar work will only get you so far. Number one, with safety, and number two, with your CNC robot. That being said, here is another example of me going through and covering some tips and tricks and stuff I've learned over the years working with solder to get you the best results when using the proper tools. And that means solder, flux, and the proper soldering iron.
All right, guys, in this portion of the video, I'm going to give you a practical example of working with ring connectors. And this, of course, is one of my solder ring connectors. Now first we're going to simulate what we saw Mr. Webb doing in his video. He had his helping hand, and if you notice this helping hand, he had his ring connector on an angle. It was almost a 45 angle. Okay, now the reason he had this angle, and he didn't state this in his video, is because he realized he did not have a seam on his ring connector. Let me show you something carefully. If you're using the proper ring connectors, they will have a seam. And you can see that right there. I hope you can get that on camera. I'm just trying to turn it so you can see it in the light. Why that seam is so important is that it will allow for solder to work in capillary action with flux, meaning that when I apply the iron to it, it's going to go right within that seam and suck itself in because of the flux. And that's what's known as proper wetting. So what I'm going to do is show you exactly how to apply solder into this, and it's going to be very, very quick when we use the proper flux. Now, flux used, Kester 186 RMA, Kester number 44 solder. And matter of fact, you can see right here, there's the internal flux within this solder as far as it being flux core. So you can actually see it melting. I'm going to come over here, and as I was stating, you have patina on my iron, but you do not have carbon, okay? We do not see black, heavy buildup. We don't see any of that. Right now, just so I can answer questions before they happen, I'm running 650 sound. Now, I can go all the way up to 752 if I hit my channel 3. Channel 1 is set at 650. Why do I go between those two temperatures? Is because there is going to be times where I'm working with thicker cable or a thicker connector, and therefore I use more heat in order to penetrate that connector or that lead better. And when I say penetrate better, we want that capillary action to work instantaneous when we're combining the flux. So let's stop talking and let's start walking, and I'll show you exactly what we've got here. So right now I'm going to apply the flux. Now watch how we do this. We've got the needle tip right here. Another question I get asked all the time. Right now this is not blocked. If your tip ever gets blocked, the easiest way to unblock it, set your heat gun up, and preferably you have a soldering station, and you just heat the tip, and when it starts bubbling like you just saw, it's ready now to release your flux. Put a drop or two in there, and you're all set. I'm going to come over here. You can see my tip, nice and clean. Watch, I'm going to just touch, perfect. I'm going to come over here, and you just saw the solder get sucked in. Turn my fan on. You can look, and you can see that is how we apply solder to this connector. It was that fast. We saw Mr. Webb doing it in his video, and he was essentially cooking his connector because he's not getting the proper wetting action and penetration action that he would be getting with flux through that capillary surface response. So now, what we're going to do, I'm going to show you how to do a quick lead. This is 16 gauge. Here is the copper. You can see exactly how much of the casing is removed. We'll do just a quick twine. We're not going to get crazy because we are going to hit this with soldering flux. And that's it. Watch this. 1, 2, 3. Done. Now, if you look at this, now this is no clean flux. However, when you get excess amounts of flux, you're better off cleaning it just to keep your connector clean. But you can see overall the huge difference in the finish of this. You can see it right here. I'm just taking the excess off. And this is my flux remover, and you can see how thin that is. It's perfect. All the way across. You get that beautiful chrome finish. Now, in best practice, what we want to do is we are not finished once we do a tin like this. You want to make sure your entire lead was penetrated with solder. How you do that, just take a pair of flush cutters, come in, put your finger over this end. Don't press too hard. You don't want to pinch your finger or get it cut. But when I do that, it protects that piece from flying across the room. And you can see right here, we've got perfect penetration. All conductors are formed. See that? So basically, you like cut the end off a cigar. You're all set there. Now you're ready to insert. You could check your insertion right here into the connector. Look at this. You're perfect. So now what I'm going to do, I've got my fan right here. She might get a little smoky in a second, but we'll do our best not to let that happen. We're going to come in with the flux again because we're not cheap with our flux. You've seen how much I'm using. Boom. You can see that little bubble right there on the end. And now I just insert the tip of my conductor. Now I'll come over here again because, once again, we're not cheap. Just a teeny bit. Now we're going to come over, do this again. Now I do have a soldering iron tip cleaner. This makes cleaning your tip very, very quickly. Come in, teeny bit. Come in again. Hit that seam and you'll see that solder get sucked right in. Done. Done. Just like that. Now, let's see what we got. We got a little bubble of solder on the top, but we could see we met our casing absolutely perfect. No deformation of our casing. It looks absolutely beautiful. And again, we're using low heat. So, if you get a little bubble of solder, this is a question that comes up a lot, on the top, here's what we do. First, we want to remove some of that solder. I use a straight edge razor blade. I'm going to do this real careful. Solder is soft. So what we want to do is take the edge off as much as possible. And what I'm doing is just trimming ever so lightly. You'll see it just come off. And what I'm doing is trying to get most of that off before we go to level. And I'll show you how we level because the flux is going to do most of our leveling. Okay, so once that's done, I'm going to come over here. And you can see, look at how that chrome finishes. And that's all because of us using flux. And I should say the proper flux. We still have a little extra solder there, no big deal. All you do, put a razor blade back because tools are important. We're going to put a drop of flux on the top. Done. And that flux is going to allow, once again, that proper wetting. We're going to keep our tip clean. I'm not going to apply anything but a dab. Watch how small. That's it. We're going to get better heat conduction. I'm going to come in here with more of the tip because adding more of the tip is going to allow for more surface area, and we're done. And that's it. There's your connector, and you can see exactly what we got. Perfect. Clean her up. And it is the exact same principle. If you get that connector to where it's clean and everything is soldered, look at the joint. And that's what I'm talking about. Let me clean that a little more. I'll give you guys a better picture on camera. Once again, a Q-tip, real high-end component. So when you see these content creators do this, and it has nothing to do with money really, other than the flux, because it's very expensive flux. But overall, you can see how that fits right in there. So we're good. Now, a couple other secrets. If your casing is not meeting the connector perfectly, as it should, okay? And this can happen for various reasons. If you use I'm using a Nipix. This is an auto stripper with the measuring gauge. If you're using an auto stripper, or any stripper for that matter, and you don't get a perfectly symmetrical cut, it happens to us all, an easy way to fix it is come over here and heat that joint. And by heating the PVC, we're going to allow for slight movement of it. I'm doing it very, very carefully. You can see it actually getting warm, and that's perfect. Now what we do, push up, hold it here, done. That's it. So again, when we can do these kind of things, when we understand what we're working with, exactly what we want, you can get the perfect finish you're looking for, and your seam is dead on. And you're not cooking your cable. If you look at this, and again, guys always have a lot of bends in their cables. If you want to take bends out, you do the same thing. You're going to heat it, and you're doing it mildly. I'm just constantly running the heat gun up and down. We're not trying to cook anything. What we're trying to do is relax the PVC. If we relax the PVC, you can take this wire and make it perfect. You can see exactly what happened here. That backed out, and you're back in seconds by a little heat. There you go. So again, it's a matter of patience. It's a matter of having the right tools. This is totally soldered on. I did not use any effort to do that at all. If I had to remove this, it would be the exact same process. But if you look at this seam right here, you can see how clean that is. If you do get any little, there's actually a tiny little nib there. What I usually do is just, if it's a tiny one, just touch it and you're perfect. That'll go right over with heat shrink and you're absolutely perfect. You should not have any sharp edges of solder remaining. This should be able to go right on perfectly. And these leads coming out of a 3-phase power cable must be insulated using heat shrink. You run the heat shrink over it. So there's no question. We'll do it right here. This is a much longer piece of heat shrink. We just trim it down. Another little secret, if you use a tool that has a perfect straight edge and you can fit it over the width of the heat shrink, you get a nice straight edge. So come over here, line it up. If your heat shrink is too big over the connector like this to hold it into position, a lot of guys have trouble with that. Here's the secret to do that. Take your heat gun. You're going to partially shrink the heat shrink. Just take the heat away and you'll notice it partially shrunk on the bottom. Now you can put this into position, get it where you want it. I usually put it on the silicone mat because silicone is heat resistant. So if we come over here, you can get your exact position in seconds and golden. There's your connector. So again, this is dead on. And you can see that seam line. You'll notice here the insulation went over, and wherever that joint was where we applied solder is now totally insulated. The only exposed area of this component will be the ring. Once again, insert your VFD screw in from its terminal block. This will not pull out, not at all. That ain't going nowhere. Telling you right now. So again, that's how fast using flux is. How long was this video?
12 minutes.
12 minutes. So watching how fast this is, that is why I tell you guys use flux. Number one, it's going to do things correctly as far as bond strength, but it also will assure that you're not fighting your tools constantly. I mean, I can't tell you enough. Like I said, if I let this cook, if I put this on 750 and you take the tip, we'll let it heat up a little bit. Let that heat up for a little bit. And then what we'll do is we'll burn off the flux, and that's when you start getting that black buildup. And for some reason, guys do not clean that solder off. They'll sit there and keep using it and using it and using it. You don't want to do that. You are going to have some waste when you solder. That's just part of soldering. Deal with it. But in order to do it right, you will understand that that waste comes with you learning too. You'll waste a lot less as you learn the proper technique and also learn how to adjust the heat on your iron. Now you can see as that flux is burning off, look, it's starting to turn black. There you go. You can see that flux is leaving the residue. I can feel the heat coming off this too. Very, very, very hot. When this gets starting to turn black like that, and I can't tell you how many guys sit there and leave it, and you can see now the solder is actually turning colors. You could see it's not chromed anymore. It's getting hazy. That's not what you want. You clean it. Once again, I'm using a brass ball in here. And of course, it's been compressed and used quite a bit. But I also have the luxury of an automatic tip cleaner. Now it's clean again. Again, if it's done correctly, we apply the solder quickly, you'll notice the solder is beautiful. Look at that color. That's the way you apply solder when it looks like this. It should not have a burned tinned look to it. If it does, your heat is too high. You can first reduce your heat. One button on the soldering station, that's why I love them, and you can reduce the heat and see if you have joy. If you don't, meaning you're fighting the connector to once again get that penetration from the flux, then it's time to increase the heat but handle the solder less, right? Makes sense. You can't sit there and dilly-dally with solder. It has to be right on within a couple seconds or you're going to have problems. Once again, clean tip. And you notice I'm not jabbing this in. It goes in just a teeny bit. You put your tip in slow. And then what we want to do is make sure it's nice and clean and you're golden. I mean, I cannot emphasize that enough. A couple other little tidbits of tips. Put a little flux on your mat. If you want to put a little flux on your tip, just touch it. You'll notice, very interestingly, it's burning the flux. Watch. It's gone. That's the beauty of silicone. It will not burn if you're careful. Also, if you notice, I got silicone on my stay put jig. And the reason I do, it's not burning. You can rest this here, you're not burning. So you can actually use it as a steadying jig. Okay? All these details come from years of experience. And this is no BS. It takes practice. Once you get it, you'll figure it out, and all of your connections will start looking like they should. But doing a video after you've done it one time and pretending you know what you're doing, or soldering once every 5 years, that's not going to show, I feel, an audience the best practice. Someone who does it every day, it actually looks very easy. It's a lot harder when you don't do it every day, because you have to formulate that process. You have to know what is the solder you're working with. Again, this is Kester number 44. You can see it right here, Kester. Okay? These are the best names in the industry, guy. I'm not saying that. I'm showing it to you. I'm showing you how fast this was to do. I can't make it any more clear than that. It's not a cheap investment, but I guarantee you, if you're serious about taking your CNC endeavor to where it should be as far as precision electronics, where we're doing the soldering correctly, we're working with three-phase power cables correctly, this is the way to do it. And I'm telling you right now, you're going to be very happy.
This is ready flux solder. Okay, so then heat this up. Pop it in there like that and release. And there you are, one soldered connection. So you just do that now on the three.
Well, it's certainly apparent Mr. Webb really just wanted to get this video done as fast as possible. This has to be one of the poorest soldered connections I've ever seen done in any of my videos, and that says a lot. Why he would have posted this into the final video and uploaded it to YouTube, I have no idea. He feels this is a completed connection. I feel this isn't even close to correct, and I think just from a logical standpoint, anyone looking at this would realize immediately the lead is supposed to be straight inside the ring connector. It shouldn't be cocked, and what we see here is just a poor demonstration of a content creator making a video to get it uploaded as soon as possible to be paid by AdSense. Well, we can see here Mr. Webb is installing his newly assembled spindle cable on his robot. And while we don't know if he actually intends to use this and put it into service, meaning the cable, or if it was simply made for the YouTube content provided for this video, we do know, in fact, that he does have a disclosure on his videos. Now, it is only located in the video's description. It is not at all spoken about in this video. He claims in this disclosure that his videos are simply made for entertainment purposes only. Yet, when we watch the video, and these are in his own words, he states that I'm going to show you in detail how to do this.
So what we're going to do now is connect into the motor, and I'm going to show you in detail how to do that.
Once again, assemble the cable with the connectors. Yet we watched and went over this video, and you can see that the process he uses with soldering is incorrect. We also then come to this portion of the video where he's actually installing the cable, and we can read here on the cable's casing there's a part number, WB1762. Well, I'm going to do a Google search here and show you what this cable actually is designed for. And then you guys can see for yourself, once again, he also selected the wrong cable. We've already identified that in the beginning of the video, but I want direct confirmation because, as I've said, there are people that think I just do videos to put people down. Once again, I'm stating a fact. The cable used for this application should be double shielded, ultra flex if it's planning on being run within a cable chain. Whether or not you get butt hurt because I'm telling the truth, that's irrelevant because there are people out there who value their money and value their safety along with their robots. This content creation of misinformation has to stop. We, once again, have to come together and realize that yes, Google AdSense is great. Everybody can make money with it if you're portraying the correct best practice for what you're doing. If, however, you're showing people incorrect practices simply because you want content, there is something wrong with that. And I'm going to show you something here that's even more disturbing, at least in my eyes. If we look here, there was a comment made on Mr. Webb's channel on this video, where once again, the content creator was called out for doing exactly as I stated. I will highlight it here for you guys all to read. It was only the third comment left on this video. Now the question is, after he was called out, why would he not make any changes or review what was being told to him? It just doesn't make sense. But I will say the gentleman who actually called him out, applause to you, sir, kudos, because I'm telling you right now, you hit the nail on the head. It's unfortunate, though, that right now YouTube is in that crossroads where everything is starting to get sorted out with this type of content creation. As that algorithm gets smarter, we are going to see this community really come together. And I hope YouTube, in some given time, will actually put together a set of vetted users that can help them, because I'm telling you right now, it's going to make a tremendous difference to everyone involved. I want to thank everybody again for your support. Take care.